Joe Paquet, welcome to the Undraped Artist Podcast.
Yeah, thank you, man. Great to be here.
Yeah,
Really
it's
great to be here.
it's my
Yeah.
pleasure. So I discovered you probably 6 or 8 months ago, and when I saw your stuff on Instagram, I saved almost every single one of your paintings on your Instagram account into my landscape
Wow.
folder. I was blown away.
Wow,
I'm like,
that means a lot, man. I can tell you without I'm trying to think of the right way to say this, without um obligatory compliment to you. I've known of your work for a long time.
oh, thank you.
And the portrait painting is such a some things speak to you and some things don't. Some things are pictures and some things do something else.
Right, right.
And your paintings have always done that for me.
Oh,
So
thanks.
I'm just happy to be able to tell you that.
Oh
And
man,
to,
I appreciate
you
that.
know, yeah, I mean it.
Well, I built a van about 2 or 3 years ago. I bought a van so that I could go out and do landscape painting because I've got some health issues, which make it difficult for me to be out by myself. And so I
Hmm.
built this van, which is basically a camper without a bed. So it's got all the comforts of
Okay.
home. Anyway, so that's why I started searching for landscape painters, and then I discovered you, and I'm just like mind blown. So I am really excited to pick your brain and kind of figure out how you think, and not
Well,
just for
you
me,
know
but for
what?
everyone else.
Yeah, well, I'm just assuming based on your work that you're going to have some really good questions.
Well, I hope so.
There's
I hope so.
nothing more enjoyable than talking to a fellow artist, with a good mind, and
Yeah, it's a blast.
because this is spirit and it's intellect,
Yeah, no kidding.
and the intellect part of it is, I think, equally important. you
Mm-hmm.
know. Although Corot did say, "Be guided by feeling alone," and I think I would say I'd be led by feeling alone.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
You know.
yeah, yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. So before we get too much into your art, I'm curious about your space behind you. I saw a brick wall to the side, and I'm going to assume that's a north window. Correct me if I'm
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah, yeah. Hang on. Let me see if I can get you. Yeah, this way. Sorry, it's in reverse.
Yeah. Is this a
Yeah, that's a big, big north window. That's uh, close the curtain because the light is just way too much light in here right now from reflection off a building across the way. So yeah, so that's I'm in a very old building, 100 and some year old warehouse,
okay?
and it's something of a giant tinker toy. It's just a brick box with giant 24 by 24-inch posts. I guess probably old growth spruce or something, with giant iron fittings on them, and everything is just fitted together like that. It's just giant beams and brick, and
Wow.
old oak floor that gives when you walk on it, which is kind of nice, especially if you're going back and forth in front of the easel. So,
Hmm. Now, did you choose a building like that to be inspired by, or was it just something that
well,
came
you know
available?
what? I think a space is really important, and I've met many artists who do beautiful work, but they're not they don't the aesthetics don't mean as much to them. The aesthetics mean a lot to me.
Hmm.
I once, years ago, a dear friend told me a story about losing her mom, and she was very close with her mom. And mom came to her in a dream, and the next night, and said to her, Lourdes, I'm okay. Everything's good. Don't worry about me. Don't grieve. But this you must remember. You must always remember that everything matters. Everything matters. And so I thought so much about that. And there's that old phrase, watch your thoughts become words, your words become your actions, and your actions become your character. But likewise, I think with the art, for me, the aesthetics of a space are really important.
Hmm.
And if I have a choice, then I'm going to have a really beautiful space. It's kind of like you look at a Stradivarius, and it's such a beautiful thing unto itself,
Yeah.
and you say, that to be able to make something beautiful with beautiful things, there's something
Hmm.
to that for me. So the palette table behind me is probably 150-year-old. I mean, there's antique people out there that are going to cringe when they hear this. Drop leaf, burl maple table that I've turned into my palette. And the top is just like glass, and it's beautiful to paint on. And I've got a beautiful trundle easel that I like the proportions of things. I was a designer uh, years ago. I went to the School of Visual Arts. We'll probably get into more of that later, but I studied design and illustration, and so the proportion, the scale of things, and then the poetics of space is, I guess, the phrase I would use. Now, you
Mm-hmm.
can work like it's a running joke with my students, like the Soltech easel. I'm sorry if the designer of that is out there and hears this, but I can't even look at it without getting an aesthetic rash because it's like a little dissection table. There's no warmth to it. So I, you
Yeah.
know, so I work with mahogany palettes, and and it's not being old school. It's being working with things that are really beautiful
Mm-hmm.
surfaces, work on a beautiful surface with great paint and good brushes and all of those things. So my space is incredibly important if I have a
Yeah.
choice, which I do at this point in my life, you know.
Yeah.
Outdoors, we don't have a choice. Outdoors, Mother Nature puts what she does on your plate and you eat it, whether you like it or not.
Right. Yeah. No
You get
joke.
what you get, and that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
You don't have control. So.
Yeah. Although Mother Nature is awfully beautiful most of the time.
Well, you know what? It's never out of harmony, is it?
No.
No matter how intense an effect or anything else, one of the most beautiful things about nature is the integration
Mm-hmm.
of form and color and value and the transitions within those things that tie everything together in this absolutely beautiful harmony.
Yeah. It's interesting that you talk about this sense of aesthetics and your space, and I'm assuming everything around you, because my students who are new to the art world often buy into the stereotypes of artists. Artists are
Yes.
slobs, artists are, well,
Ah,
we'll
yeah.
just stick with slobs. I'm not going to feed all the other stereotypes right now, but um,
Well, we know what they all
yeah,
are,
we know they are. But I always tell them, I'm like, most great realists that I've met are not all, but most are neat. They have a beautiful space. Everything around them seems beautiful. They seem to crave aesthetics everywhere they go. And so that stereotype,
Mm,
it doesn't seem to apply.
yeah.
At least that's been my experience. Now there are a few exceptions, which I wouldn't name, but most realists that I know seem to have share that sentiment of needing beauty around them. I certainly
Yeah,
do.
I just think that it's a beauty and a lack of chaos.
Yeah.
I mean, if I think of Francis Bacon's studio
Oh,
or
God.
Lucian Freud's studio, the thing is I mean, if I was painting in there, I'd just be waiting for the rat to dash out from under that pile
Oh,
of paint
I
rags.
know.
And so and when people see pictures of my studio, like on Instagram, because I'll take these beautiful shots. At the end of the day, I'll go to leave, and the light is just coming in at an angle on the back wall, and the shapes are beautiful, and the colors. And I'm like, I got to take a picture of this.
Yeah.
And they go, "Oh, you're too neat. You're too you." Yeah. Well, the outward order balances my inner chaos.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's,
that's
you know what I
interesting.
mean?
Yeah.
I,
I like
I
that.
think, I think really, I mean, the way my mind works has always been unusual, I guess, for lack of any other word. And the way I look at the world and all that kind of stuff, I've been an inveterate daydreamer my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And the funny thing is now I get paid for everything I got in trouble for as a kid.
Isn't that funny how that works? I would be unemployed
Yeah.
if I couldn't work for myself. I'd be unemployed. When I took the ACTs, I got through the math and science section because I'm relatively interested in those two subjects. But then when I got into the reading section, I saw someone playing soccer outside, and an hour and a half later, the bell went off, and I realized I was daydreaming for an hour and a half during the ACTs.
Oh, attaboy.
Yeah, man, that was my life in school. So yeah, I think we artists
Wow.
can relate. I think that's a stereotype that is pretty accurate for most of us.
Yeah.
So my guess is you're in New Jersey or New York based on your accent.
No, I'm in St. Paul, but
Okay.
New Jersey is in me.
Okay,
Yeah.
you're from New
That's
Jersey. Okay,
yeah.
that's what I
Yeah.
thought.
You can take the boy out of Jersey, but can't take Jersey out of the boy.
Okay.
So,
Well, tell me a little bit about your past. Like, how did you end up becoming a full-time painter?
I'll try to make it quick. I was fortunate. I had two parents that were super hardworking people. My mom was a homemaker, but was always creative, making clothes for us and all that kind of stuff. Cooked 3 meals a day, from scratch. And my dad worked on the railroad, and he was a giant fellow, 6'6"
Hmm.
tall, and he was started out as a young man as a dock builder, an iron worker, a mason, a carpenter, and then ended up working his way up with 5 kids. But my mom didn't drive, and because of that, I had I think a little bit more unusual upbringing than some people. Because I basically, I've said before, only half jokingly, I was like a veal. I was fed and watered and put in the backyard, to just wander around and
Mm-hmm.
try not to get into trouble. So spent a lot of time just on my bike, and when I was 5 or 6, I started drawing, and I think we have proclivities perhaps for some things, but it's just following it and getting some genuine reinforcement.
Mm-hmm.
But I also came from a family that didn't. It was very tough. Let me put it this way: my mother grew up on a farm in Germany during World War II. Okay, plowed with oxen as a child. My
Wow.
mother, not my grandmother. Okay,
Wow.
my mom. And so, she didn't drive. And so you weren't being patted on the back constantly for drawing a breath, it
Right.
wasn't like that.
Right.
We were loved. We were taken care of. We had plenty to eat. We were safe, all that good stuff. But it wasn't constant. Oh my God, you're amazing. Let me give you a trophy because it's Monday. And
Yeah.
but because of that, I drew and I drew and I drew and ended up drawing in high school, having a great high school art teacher, and my brother, Jim, who was a graphic designer and an art director. And he said, Joe, you really should go to art school, because I was considering going to Syracuse University because I was a real intense athlete as a young guy. I played 3 sports for 4 years, and they had a really good football program and a good art program. So I thought maybe because I loved playing the sports that maybe I'd combine the two. And I was talked out of it by an athletic director of all things, Joe Williams.
Hmm.
He said, Joe, you'll ruin your body. Go to a good art school. And I'm like, okay.
Wow.
And ended up applying to the School of Visual Arts in New York, which was just rocking at the time. I mean, oh man, my teachers were the most amazing illustrators and graphic designers in Manhattan.
You're kidding.
I mean, I had Jim McMullan as a drawing teacher for 2 years, and I'm trying to think, Bob Giusti and Wendell Miner, and I mean, these people are book designers and illustrators and great photographers, great graphic designers.
And what year
But
was
during
this?
this was 85 is when I got in,
So
or
the
late
key
84.
so the key must have been that you went into commercial art, because if you had gone into the fine arts, you probably would have ended up with a more of a modern art approach.
It's entirely possible, except that while I was in school, I fell in love with the old illustrators, Howard
Yeah.
Pyle and N.C. Wyatt. And I used to go down to Brandywine to the museum. Actually met Andrew Wyeth, oddly, one day, all by himself in the gallery. I was
Wow.
just there with my painting mentor and one other student, and went up and talked to him and had this amazing conversation with him. So I was just fascinated by the Wyeths and the illustration of the time because I was studying illustration. But most of the illustration at SVA was you were expected to have a style.
Yeah.
And how can you have a style unless you manufacture one? You can't organically have one at that age. And so what you see is all these people doing exactly what's going on in the fine art world today. They cobble together a look by adopting the mannerisms of other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so they say, you can tell if you look at somebody's paintings, if they, if they studied with Scott Christensen or Albert Hendel or David Lafell, and there's nothing wrong with some of that. But if the students are adopting the mannerisms instead of the principles that govern the mannerisms, that's where the problem lay.
Yeah.
And at School of Visual Arts, I had such an issue with that. And I remember for my senior year, I did 2 large charcoal drawings for my final project, like a la N.C. Wyeth, Howard Pyle, for a short story to build a fire. And I didn't even get a second look from the advisors or anything. And they did a big compendium of the students' work. And I just, what it is, honestly, Jeff, I don't think I've ever I fit somebody else's idea of what I'm supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so during that time, I did fall in love with figure drawing because Jim McMullan taught an amazing drawing class. John Foote was this great teacher, totally inspiring. And you have to understand, I was that veal. I mean, I never went anywhere. I never was on a plane. I'd never been into Manhattan, even though I lived 20 minutes away.
Yeah.
I mean, in New Jersey, because my dad was working all the time.
Yeah.
And so John Foote opened the world to me, but figure drawing, man, that was it. I'm like, I want to become a great draftsman. And then I went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, to the print and drawing room with 3 friends of mine. And my buddy who put it all together said, who do you want to look at? I said, are you kidding? And I want to look at Ang or Ong, however you want to say it, Ingres.
Yeah.
Degas, on and on and on, Michelangelo, of course. And the appointed day came and we ended up there. They gave us cotton gloves and a magnifying glass. And now imagine, this is 1983, okay?
Mm-hmm.
The guy that's bringing out these boxes with the original drawing sees how reverential we are. And he says, if you want to photograph them, you can, but I have to lift the acetate. You can't touch it.
Okay.
So we said, great.
Yeah.
So I photographed all of these things. And after a while, he was like, you know what? Just do it yourself. Be careful.
Really? What an opportunity.
No. All right. So, but this is the life-changing stuff, right?
Okay.
So he brings out Michelangelo's Study for the Libyan Civil,
Mm-hmm.
most famous drawing in the history of art, red chalk nude.
You gotta
And
be kidding
I
me.
literally had a physical, spiritual reaction to it, and without any exaggeration. I mean, and that's what I have come to realize is the difference between looking at art and witnessing art. When you witness art, it's something it's literally a full experience, mind, body, spirit. It's overwhelming. And then when I looked at the drawing, not only was it perfect in every way and freely executed, everything rhythmically connected and hierarchical, but I felt something before I saw something.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that there was so much more to be had potentially.
Mm-hmm.
And the only other times that happened to me were with Michelangelo's Unfinished Slaves
Mm-hmm.
in Florence and seeing, I think, Levitan's paintings. Saw 2 of his paintings, and that really changed my life too, for exactly the same reasons. It was about sensitivity, not technique, not a hook. So many people, there's all these videos out there now, as I'm sure all too well aware of. Everybody retires from one job and they're going to be an artist. That's it.
Yeah.
You're an artist. You're going to market yourself. You're going to be in a gallery. You're going to be this. You're going to be that. And so there's no organic timeline anymore for study. And the room for wonder.
Mm-hmm.
Wonder takes time. And wonder and curiosity and exploration take time. But many people are trying to supplant that by adopting other people's way of seeing or doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's highly unfortunate, I guess I'd say.
Yeah.
And that's why, like I said, when I saw your work, all those years ago with no BS. I mean, I'm telling you the God's honest truth. When I saw it, I'm like, this guy's doing something.
Oh, I really appreciate that. That means a lot.
These are cool. These are powerful. They're different. Now, I don't paint portraits regularly. I spend a year and a half painting portrait every week. And once in a while, I'll do a portrait head of somebody that matters to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'll do a study because that's everything to me is about connection.
Yeah.
Because the rest is just picture making.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you're not connected to something, how do you expect to go deep? You know, it's impossible to go deep without connection. You can craft something well. There's certainly a lot of really talented people out there right now. The studio schools are churning out, you know, groups of young people every year that are highly skilled, you know. But in the end, I think there's this very fine challenge, at least that I've experienced, and that's that I don't want to try to paint a prior aesthetic. You know, I respect Corot highly. I respect Levitan highly, but they were of their time, you know, and I want to make sure that if I can adopt the great things from them, like Corot said, be guided by feeling alone. He also said when painting outdoors, it should be like a child blowing up a balloon with every breath that affects the whole thing. I mean, he's all these beautiful little nuanced ways, the things that I can glean from that. And with Levitan, it was, oh my God, there's no exaggeration here.
Mm-hmm.
It's so substantive and it's so sensitively observed. The level of sensitivity is what brought him to where he was, not technique.
Mm-hmm.
Technique means nothing if it's not served by spirit, in my mind. And there are plenty of people that can render beautifully out there. And I don't mean it pejoratively, but rendering to me is just part of something.
Yeah.
If the hand is not driven by the abject desire to say something, which is an internal motivation, as opposed to us being externally motivated, you know, fame, fortune, you know, being noticed, getting likes, doing all these things, that affects the choices that we make.
Mm-hmm.
But I think to wander and to wonder and to allow the world in takes time. And I've actually had students that are older and they go, well, I don't have time. I say, BS, I'm sorry, you have time. There's a time, it's just that, you know, you want a certain result right now, right? And if you think you're going to get that by adopting the mannerisms of other people, you know, and I've called those folks workshop Frankensteins pejoratively, where they, you know, they got the head of one artist and the arms of somebody else, and they're all sewed together or sewn together, and in this kind of unfortunate amalgam of other people's handwriting. And so, you know, for me, I just, when somebody says, what are you doing? I can say honestly, I mean, very honestly, even to, you know, some of my students that I've had for a very long time, they'll say, what are you working on? I say, I'm studying. And they're like, no, really, what are you doing? I said, really, I'm studying.
Yeah.
Because at this point, and I'm going to be 60 this year, study is all that matters. The study and the connection, because the more, I mean, after all these years of painting outdoors, I'm really pleasantly surprised that I'm seeing things I've never seen before.
Isn't that something after all those years? Because I have the same experience at my easel where I learned something that I'm like, I wish I knew that 20 years ago. How am I still? And it's not even things that are difficult to execute. It's just a different way of using a medium or something, or a different way of observing a model.
It's also about letting go.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, what's so attractive to most people when they look at an abstract expressionist painting? I think the abandon is terribly exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to let go. And I think most realists would tell you that they'd feel the same way. If they could let fire and still have the level of control that they want in a painting, right? And some people have been able to do it highly effectively, you know, Zorn and you know, of course, Sorolla, good heavens, and Sargent. but false or cheeky brevity in a painting loses me. If somebody's being techniquey or clever,
I
it's
agree.
kind of self-congratulatory. And I think one of the gifts that come with being an outdoor painter for so many years and painting mostly from life is humility. You know, it really is hard to be, you know, they always say in war that you rarely see an atheist in a foxhole.
Yeah.
Well, you don't see a whole lot of egotists that paint outdoors on a regular basis. Most of the ones that I've met, the finer artists that are out there, they really do have a degree of humility to temper, you know, the hubris that it takes just to face a blank canvas and think you have something to bring to the world.
Well, you know what I've noticed? I think that I haven't spent enough time outdoors to make that make that observation, but what I've noticed is just great painters tend to be very humble, and I've concluded that's because you can't be great without realizing how bad you are and constantly striving to be better.
Yeah, I think being understanding that we're limited
Yeah.
is important, and I think that you know, no offense to all the people that do nothing but studio work out there, but I've found a whole lot more people that work in the studio that have ego issues than ones that work outdoors.
Oh,
And that's
interesting.
because you control everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Outdoors, you control nothing but how you react to not having control.
Yeah, it's brutal. I've found that as
Yeah.
I've tried to figure it out being
Yeah,
outside.
especially like I said, if you're used to, you know, I once was at a show many years ago, and this artist came up to me, and he was pretty popular in the gallery, and he said, looked at my paintings, he said, huh, plein air? I said, yeah. He goes, not me. I'm never more than 10 feet from my coffee pot and stereo. And he did these really tightly photographically rendered little landscapes
Yeah.
that were, you know, they were nice, you know. But I often wonder if we didn't have the photograph to look at how differently we would actually perceive, because I think we have been informed subconsciously by photography and by the photographic image, because binocular vision, we have two eyes, it's completely different. You know, the optics of paint, by learning to paint optically, which is something that I work on a lot myself. You know, if I stare in one area in the painting and everything loses information and edges, and as I spiral out from that point, how much am I perceiving in my peripheral vision? Not when I jump my eye from place to place to place to place, you know, and that's where, you know, so much of the subjective choice making comes in, that I think is what makes something art as opposed to a rendering, right? Every time Jeffrey Hine makes a choice that's subjective, it's more of a Jeffrey Hine painting than it is an image, a photograph.
Right.
And I think that's the genius of Hopper, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hopper is his subjective choice making is extraordinary. His edit and distillation, how he saw nature and how he edited and selected. And that's why people could copy a Hopper but never paint one, because those were all subjective choices.
Yeah.
You know, and so, you know, there's two sides of the coin. I mean, I think if you look at the 20th century, it makes sense that art went the way it did, right? Because if you look at some of the naturalist painters, I'm sure you're well aware of their work, late 19th century, they started incorporating photography into their work, right? And they would have these big glass houses outside in France, and they'd photograph the figure under north light, and then they would paint a landscape on a gray day and incorporate the two. Ridgeway Knight, Daniel Ridgeway Knight, famous painting, Hailing the Ferry, was done that way. And a lot of people, but what happened is when they started incorporating photography, I think unfortunately being more correct didn't make the paintings better, or being more, quote, real. And I think that's why the pendulum had to swing so wildly the other way. I think it was a perfectly natural reaction, because where do you go from there? And if you look at the salon paintings from the 1870s right up until 1900, you were basically looking at the forerunner of cinema and Hollywood. The paintings were getting larger, more violent, more sexual or salacious. And it was all about getting somebody's attention in that room,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then somebody comes along like Bastien Lepage. God bless Bastien Lepage. What an amazing character, right? Sickly dude, lived in this little village, painted the people that he knew in a humble, genuine way, and he blew everybody away because he wasn't painting. It wasn't about cinema. It was about him connecting to something that he knew. It was some humble honesty, all right, packaged in beautiful observation. So he paints a goose girl, and what happens? All these people go out and start painting goose girls because he painted a goose girl. They missed the whole damn point.
Yeah, you gotta know, isn't that funny?
It's not about the
Yeah.
goose girl. It's about painting what means something to you. So that's why I think the Solana, if you look at it, it's just like movies, right? Everything got, like I said, the paintings got more giant, more violent. There's all this action all the time. And modernism needed to occur. And I think, as a representational painter, understanding what happened is important without being so reactionary about it.
Mm-hmm.
I've got friends that are militant about everything. Oh, I hate this, and this is all crap, and this is the only time that anything was ever good. Look, I think you can learn from all times. The only difference, the only caveat that I would add is that with the 20th century, most of the work is idea-based or ideative.
Yeah.
People aren't necessarily telling you what they love, they're telling you what they think.
Mm-hmm.
I would rather hear what you love.
I agree. Absolutely.
That's my main issue with it. If everything is about an idea, because if you go to Florence, Italy, and you go to the Pitti Palace, I don't know if you've ever been, but there's a group of painters there called the Macchiaioli,
Yeah.
which macchia means spot in Italian. It's a group of outdoor painters that were doing amazing work, jaw-dropping, from 1850 through the 1880s. And their work was all different, but beautifully drawn, stylistically different, but based in observation. So their work, when you look at their work as a group, it was really stunning that they weren't all copying each other, right? There wasn't some, homogenous quality to it at all. But when Cezanne hit, you can see it in the museum, all the work changed, all the Italian work, everything, the flat pattern, big flat color spots. People subjected their vision to Cezanne.
Mm-hmm.
Because they felt it was the only way to be relevant. And same thing happened with, in a contemporary sense, with George Bellows. I give a little talk on Bellows to my students, and it's a really important one because it's about the difference between being of your own mind and then subjecting yourself, usually filtered by our own fear about not being relevant. He wanted to be, when modernism came in, the Armory show in 1913 in Manhattan, he said, I need to get more modern color into my work. So if you know early Bellows, those snow scenes and stuff, they're stunning, but they're all tonal.
Right.
He's working with a very close value range with a limited palette, and he's got that most gorgeous balance of risk and care in his work because he drew beautifully. Very fiery, So what happened is he wanted more modern color. So he started using more chromatic color in his paintings. His drawing within 2 or 3 years slipped from character to caricature. So these little changes happened. And then you see this huge shift in his work. He did this portrait, you probably know it, Paddy Flanagan. It's this tough little Irish street kid. If you don't find it,
okay,
as a portrait painter, you're going to look at it and
I'm
go,
sure I've seen it. I'm terrible.
It's so amazing. But it had all that character, and it had that balance of risk and care, and that character, the importance of character versus caricature. And that's such a fine line, right?
Yeah.
Take your foot off the gas just a little bit, and the shapes start to look the same.
Right.
Just a little more general. And what happened is, in his quest to be modern, he basically gave up, I think, so many of the things that made his work so heartfelt and powerful.
Yeah. Man, this is good stuff. So, a couple thoughts I had. One is when you were talking about this sense of originality and where you've seen so many students kind of try and mimic other artists and
Hmm.
look for their style. Have you noticed in your years of teaching that whether or not students sort of come with their own mannerisms innately, or
Oh,
have you?
that's a great question, Jeff. Yeah, I've been teaching a long time. I mean,
Yeah,
26 years. A lot of people, thousands, literally between classes and workshops. And I taught regular classes, so I trained a lot of people as
yeah,
well.
right.
It wasn't, just a one, weekly visit kind of thing. But yes, I think well, let me put it this way. I think we come in with proclivities,
Yeah.
right? And I have a pyramid of training that I designed for my students to help diagnose their skill sets, where they're at,
Mm-hmm.
and so that we can balance their skill set so they can stay in alignment as they move up, right? And so basically, the chart I designed is like a pyramid. At the top of it is a circle, which would be mastery, which, whatever you refer to as mastery or think of as mastery. But usually, when I think of mastery, I think of somebody making a mark, and in that single mark is drawing and color and value and shape and edges and composition and form. Their skill sets are so finely aligned that it's like a stack of pennies sitting on top of each other.
Mm-hmm.
But what I do is I have everybody chart themselves, right? So here's drawing down here at the base of the pyramid, right? And then, here's mastery. So between beginner and mastery, plot a point. Where are you? And then do it for color and value and for color as value, for form, composition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Most people, when they chart themselves, they get this EKG, right?
Yeah.
And the great unfortunate thing about it is so often I think people inadvertently, not consciously, but inadvertently identify themselves by their weaknesses and not their strengths. Illustrated by the fact that somebody says, "Oh, I'm an impressionist," because they never decided to learn to draw,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Or I'm a colorist. In other words, it becomes a default point. So and that's fine. Do what you want to do. But what I say to the people that I work with and the people that I do mentoring with, because I mentor people across the US and in Europe and all over the place, I say, look, just if you could do it, wouldn't it be great to not have anything to apologize for? How about that?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of, having, to be out there. And believe me, because I've had a lot of mentoring students now, and I started mentoring before it was cool back in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
And because I taught workshops all over, and people would go, "Boy, I wish I could have the opportunity that your regular students have had." I said, "Well, all right, let's just try this and see how it goes." And, even I was rather dubious about it at the beginning, except that it worked out really well. And the results for the people that were willing to do the work,
Mm-hmm.
right, and do what was in their own best interest did really well and made, really solid strides with their
Yeah.
work. But that skills assessment, every once in a while I'll get a mentoring student who's frankly deluded, and there's not much I can do with that.
Yeah.
Because I always say, look, if we're not the whole key to growth is honesty in life and in art, right? So if you want to get better as an artist, then look at the things that you can be better at. And I'm this constant proponent of constant action. I'll go, you know what? If I'm taking my foot off the gas a little bit on that shape, shame on me, because that shape is different than the one next to it. And I put a lot of care into the drawing in my paintings, and because I think how well I draw that shape shows how much I respect the difference in that thing than the difference in the thing next to it.
Yeah.
So the idea is to say everything is different. If everything is different, then what is different about it? And sometimes that level of nuance is extraordinarily minute. It's the tiniest difference in angle or a shape. What's the difference in the character between that tree and the bush next to it?
Mm-hmm.
What is the shadow? What does the character along the edge of the shadow shape tell me about the character of that object? And how different is that? And frankly, if somebody was looking at this painting just for fun, would they be able to know that I painted a tomato plant, even though I suggested it at that size?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of cool to me,
Mm-hmm.
because that's one way to take uh, the necessity of subject away from painting.
Yeah.
Because I think the more deeply you observe, the more you find beauty in the commonplace.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I'm so drawn to with your work. I mean, look at the painting right behind you. This is not something that your average painter might have chosen. I
No,
mean,
no.
it's like it's the average painter might have usually goes for the standard, a river running from the front to the back. You know,
Mhm.
it's usually a babbling brook or something, right?
Well, you know
And
what it
I
is? It's not the obvious beauty. There's nothing wrong with obvious beauty. It's
no,
grand, right? It's just that it's obvious. And and
and there's
and
so
I think,
much of it,
yeah, and that's why I say I think it's even harder for portrait and figurative painters to find something unique,
right?
because we're all used to looking at human beings. So if you're not going deeper, what are you left with? You're left with technique, right? You come up with a technique that's a little different or something,
Yeah,
ad nerdrum, right? And then you can watch how there are other, contemporary portrait painters that I've followed that I like their work a lot, figurative painters. But, and what happens is I find that in lieu of sensitivity, people will often go to subject or paint manipulation.
mm,
If the more sensitive you are, like the sensitivity is what drives my brush, not a concept, right? If I'm painting behind me, that painting, there's a limestone cliff with a half-hewn cave in there. And the color of that limestone was something I've never painted before. I'm like, how do I paint that so it feels like limestone? And then how is that different than all of those old retaining walls? The first ones are probably 1880. The latter ones came in 1950 and then 19. Like, what is it about the character of each thing that's completely different? And how do I make a mark that expresses that?
mm,
So it's not brushwork by itself, and every once in a while, especially in a workshop, I'll get somebody who studied with everybody, and they'll tell you, oh, I
mm-hmm.
studied with Albert and I studied with David and I studied, it's always first names.
Right, right,
And
yeah,
I'm like, that's all fine, but I'll know exactly what after the first hour you put your brush to the canvas, okay? And and somebody will say, talk to me about brushwork, and I say, no, I absolutely will not. Specious brushwork bores the shit out of me, Jeff.
no, I'm so glad you said that
Brushwork
because
for
that's one of
for
the things
its
I want to talk about.
Yeah, it just, what it is? It's self-congratulatory. I always think of Errol Flynn jumping on the table with his sword. Welcome to Sherwood. That's
Right, right.
look how clever this mark is. No, how about look how well this mark communicates the tiny difference between this versus the thing next. How do
Yeah,
I do that?
this
Like, to
this
me,
this might be the reason why I saved all of, no, well, it's not the only reason by far, but it is one of the reasons I saved so many of your paintings because I looked at yours and I've looked at so many landscape painters as I've, you know, tried to embark on this new journey myself. And many times you'll see painters that have this certain little flick or twist of the wrist everywhere, right?
yes.
And I'm not saying that that's wrong, but what I appreciate about yours is that the is that they're uniquely you without having some little trick or contrived little brushstroke, right?
Affect. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
affect.
it's yeah,
I always think of Monet, and I'm sure I'll get struck by lightning by the plein air painting gods out there in the world. But early on, Monet had his kettle drum stroke, I call it, this big square mark. Like
yeah.
boom, 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 boom. What happens when you hear that? Your ear goes to sleep,
Mm,
right? When you see that, your eye goes to sleep. I'm sorry. I appreciate the greatness of what he did, okay?
yeah.
But nuance in character, if you nullify the little differences in character, you move towards something more general. And sometimes when you see somebody's work, even though their work might be very well known, it looks different all in exactly the same way. you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And like, you know what? Damn, Jeff, I want to be surprised. I want to look at your work in a couple of years and go, this guy's moving. He's looking. She's looking.
Mm-hmm.
Not that they're cooked. I mean, it's a silly phrase, but it was apt for the time. George Innes said, he goes, I prefer to consider myself dough rather than cake, always subject to a new impression. And if you look at his paintings, the thing I love about Innes is there's always a little battleground somewhere in his painting. He didn't have it down to a science. He wasn't going, look how clever I am. Man, the guy was digging. He was trying to say something. Like painting, the great painters, it's about saying something, not being heard anyway.
Right.
And that fundamental difference of having something to say, then that's external versus internal motivation. And I think it was Robert Henry in his book, The Art Spirit, said, when somebody has something to say and they try very hard to say it, they will learn how to draw.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel the same way about character in things, in nature. You know, a budding tree. Yes, there's a lot of really clever technicians out there, and the work is clever, and it can be beautiful in its own way. But you know what? If I look at your work and I see just Jeffrey Hine, not so impressed. What I want to see is I want to see you or anyone else informed by something bigger than them so that the funnel can grow outward with their work. That there's the chance for greater growth, that there's the opportunity for evolution. And there's a lot of artists, people we both know that play it really safe. They paint the same stuff over and over and over again because it works, right? And they,
Yeah.
and to me, you know what? I'm not questioning their judgment about that because we all have to make a choice. We all have to make a living, right?
Right.
I've had friends that say, I'm a provider. I have to provide. Well, I get it, man. I went through a divorce, started all over again with nothing. Got remarried, had a son. I have three kids I've had to take care of and pay for colleges and everything else. And I did it somehow doing this. Nobody's asking for that painting along the railroad, Jeff. That is something that excites me. I see something, I drive by, and it was that over my door, when you walk into my studio, I have a quote from Rainer Maria Rilke from Letters to a Young Poet. He said, if your environment seems poor, do not blame it. Blame yourself. Tell yourself you are not yet poet enough to call forth its riches. For to the Creator, there is no poor and indifferent place.
That's beautiful. After this, I want to have you tell me that again. Because I'm going to forget.
I will.
Because I want to put that on my door. But before you go any further, because you're telling me so many things and I've got questions like crazy and I want to keep track of
this. Fire away, man. My time's your time. I'm wide open.
Okay. I appreciate that. So let's go back to the brushstroke.
Okay.
So there's a couple things I want to touch on. We talked about the brush marks and then we talked about this sense of place and being able to make a place. I'm going to put in layman's terms because I'm not terribly articulate. But what I heard you saying was that if you're a great painter, you can take a place that seems relatively ordinary and put beauty into it.
Mm-hmm. Starting
with the brushstroke. So without being clever, because there's certain artists, and I don't want to pick on artists in this podcast, but you see it all the time where you have like a certain way of painting a bush and a certain way of painting a tree and a certain way of painting a rock, right?
Calligraphy,
right. And that's what I think you're saying when you're talking about clever. So explain to me, like I'm a lay person who's never picked up a brush. What are you thinking about if you're not going back to this formulaic solution time and time again? What are you thinking about when you're looking at an object and deciding how to shape your next stroke?
I absolutely have an answer for you on this.
Good.
I just went through this last year when I was doing some drop-in classes. My teacher, after I got out of School of Visual Arts, I studied with this great painter. He was the one who taught me the Prismatic Palette, John Phillip Osborne.
Okay.
And he was generous and he was kind, and I just can't ever thank that man enough for opening my world. But what he would do was he would put things into words. when I was trying to figure out how to use the prismatic palette, I'd say, well, what color is that? He'd say, it's a violety, grayish green with a little orange and white in it.
Mm-hmm.
So your brain starts working and you go, okay. So now, likewise, when I'm teaching a student, I'll say, okay, you've got these two trees next to each other and a bush. They're all different. Now describe it to me. And the student said, well, this tree is spiky. It's like spikes in layman's terms. The darks were spiked. I'm like, perfect. Okay. What about the one next to it? It's rounded. It's a combination of rounded forms and angular forms. Okay, let's start with that. What about the next one? The transitions are very subtle. It softens from the dark to the light. It softens the transition is very subtle. And the edges are very feathery. Okay. Just think about those three descriptions now and how you would apply a mark to serve those descriptions.
Oh, I love it.
And you're on your way.
That's amazing. So based on that explanation, you never paint a painting the same way.
No, I don't.
Twice. So
no, if
you go
look
from
at my
one
paintings, if you look at them, they're all different.
Right, because they're as different as every object is to the object before it.
As Jeff, God's honest truth, to the best of my ability, that's what I try to do. I think if you respect that thing that's in front of you and you're really interested in telling the story about it. See, I look at objects in the landscape the way you look at a face.
Mm-hmm.
How different every face is. That's why I don't like generic forms in my paintings. I abhor lazy shapes. Drives me up a tree. And, you know, a lot of the time people go, oh, well, you're a landscape painter. You don't have to worry about shapes. You don't have to worry about drawing, blah, all that crap. You know, the bottom line is I think if I sat down, I could paint a pretty good likeness of you right now because, and it's not bragging. It's because that's the care that I take when I'm outside. I just try never to be lazy about it and to honor the thing that makes that thing. What is the spirit in that thing, and how is it completely different than what's next to it? And again, I go back to the propensity for the same mark, and you see it with lots of painters. This or a flick or this or that. And actually, one of the things that I hate, and I'll probably get in a lot of trouble for saying this, is now with this propensity of reels and stuff on Instagram I call them the affected final touch videos. I can't stand them. Where the painting's all done and the artist goes in and you see the hand go in and go. Because that's not scripted at all. That's, that's not premeditated. That's not, oh, come on. It's,
man, I think it might be a generational thing because I can't bring myself to do reels at all. Oh goodness,
I just you know what it is. It's just that what's happening is it's the tail wagging the dog at this point. Instagram is telling you if you want to get noticed, then you have to do this and you have to do that.
I know.
And now all these artists are constantly going, oh my God, I got to redo the algorithm here so that I can figure out how to get out. And you're chasing the tail of a tiger, man. This is never going to end.
Mm-mm.
This is I always think about it's like a painting. It's how a painting starts. To me, it's not how you finish a painting, but it's how you start a painting, right? There's something about that. And if you're constantly chasing the painting, then you're always get something that's not harmonic, that generally has divided interest in it and things like that. And I don't know. So I'm just, and again, it could be something of an age thing as well. But I frankly, I think Instagram's a great tool, and it's a wonderful thing for artists today. But this idea of them saying, look, if you don't do this now, you're not going to get noticed. That's just how it is. And so all these artists are becoming entertainers. Jesus, for crying out loud, don't you struggle to get enough time to paint to begin with?
Yeah.
And now what you've got to do is you've got to go out and you've got to figure out how to do this and do that. So, you get noticed. And the other part of it is this. We have both seen these people that are influencers out there, right? And there's a lot of different ways to get people's attention. Some of it's really salacious. There's a lot of, people in scantily clad in front of a very bad canvas. They get 50,000 likes or something. And But what does any of it mean, I guess, ultimately? And again, that idea of if you're chasing something externally, that means you're taking yourself outside of that organic internal spiral that brings you to who you're meant to be. Every time you go outside of that spiral and you do it, you follow external motivation, you're spiraling out in a different direction. And I think it takes real great courage today, and stamina and some insanely thick skin, which is very hard because, I'll be painfully honest with you. I mean, oh man, I was the most sensitive kid you've ever met in your life, man. Cry at a heartbeat, all that kind of stuff. I'm sure the reason I spent 8 years in the weight room and wrestling and all that stuff was to thicken up a shell around a very soft yolk.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to be sensitive and be open to the world to receive it, but not also be crushed by it.
Yeah.
And so there's that constant dance, because you hear these people go, oh, I don't care what anybody thinks and blah, blah, blah. And there may be some truth to that and there may not be truth to it because, as you well know, artists are like cats and really insecure cats.
Yeah. That's a good one.
And I think the more you expose yourself, and I mean by that, telling the world what you love is real exposure.
Yeah.
Not following a trendy, viewpoint, whatever that might be. They finally came up with a good phrase for it, virtue signaling. There's a whole lot going on today, particularly online. I got in a huge amount of trouble during the George Floyd thing that happened here. And it was in our backyard practically. It was awful. And all these artists just started posting black spots. And I thought, what do you think that's going to do?
Yeah.
In the real world, what is any of that doing? It's not doing anything. So I put up a post and all I said, and it was very gentle, and I just said, though I appreciate the act of solidarity behind the black spot, and it does little to change anything. Why not instead everyday acts of kindness? Take somebody to the grocery store, call somebody who's down, blah, blah, blah. That's all I said. And I got raked over the coals.
Oh, I'm sure you did.
And it was all of this virtue signaling that's going on out there. People, they want to be perceived as being a certain way, and being an artist, man, to be a real artist for me is having a vision, having an extraordinary set of skills, and somehow pulling those two things together. And it's a path historically and now that has always had to be walked alone. Mm-hmm. And in the 20th century, something changed, especially with art criticism, where you were constantly being validated by being bracketed by other artists. Okay, so a modern art critic might say, Jeffrey Hines' work has shades of Twombly, but leanings of this other artist, and this meets that. In other words,
right,
that it can't just be what it is. You have to be validated by being bracketed between other people. And if you think about the world that we're living in currently and how plasticky it is and how narcissistic it is, who do we pay? Who gets paid the most in our society?
Athletes. Oh, actors and athletes. Yeah.
But what are actors? Their job is to be someone else.
Yeah.
So the people we reward the most highly are those who are gifted at being someone else. Just think about that.
Isn't that bizarre?
It's rather strange, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think, and so I think there's with most artists, there's fear, deep-seated fear that they're not good enough, or they don't have anything to bring to the world, and so it's easier to go down the trodden path, and kind of follow what other people have done, what's been pre-approved or pre-accepted. And so you see certain painters that are painting like the 19th century. Mm-hmm. You see, I walked into a gallery in California and I saw somebody that was ripping off Hopper so badly.
You're kidding.
that it was an embarrassment, I thought, to the gallery. And it's just like, there's everything about this. There's nothing left of this human being. And then years ago, I had a collector, a wonderful fellow, just a dear friend. But early in his career, he had collected a particular artist who was constantly painting like the Impressionists.
Yeah.
Pizarro, namely. And he wouldn't take no for an answer because I didn't want to engage in this dialogue with him. And he said, "What do you think of these paintings?" I said,
Of
"Did you
his
see?"
paintings.
Yeah, of this particular artist's painting.
Yeah.
I said, "Don't ask me that." He said, "No." He said, "Tell me what you think of the paintings." I said, "Did you ever see Silence of the Lambs?" He said, "Yeah." I said, where he peeled off someone's face and he put it on his own? I said, "Yeah." I said, "That's what those paintings are."
Oh, harsh.
It's
Oh
true.
man.
Sorry. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Look,
Hey,
don't ask if you don't want to hear it.
right.
I mean, the bottom line is everybody's so busy being palatable that nobody has a real conversation about anything anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the biggest issues that I have. I don't have to be right. I was telling you on the break that my biggest thing is my biggest abhorrence these days is certitude of people that are certain about things.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm not certain about anything, man. I'm clear about certain things right now based on what I know
Yeah.
and how I feel about something, but I'm never done. And I think the art world on both sides, whether you're representational or non-representational, is filled with people that are defending themselves with swords of vested interest, right? As somebody once said. You know what? I don't need to denigrate what you're doing to elevate what I do. I just do what I do. You do what you do. Okay? Let's just
Mm-hmm.
leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody once said to me in New York, a former director of a big gallery in New York said, you would think that in the 21st century, there was room enough for both, right? But, what happened with 2000 and 2006 or 2008 is a lot of galleries stopped selling representational painting out of fear because they weren't selling paintings. So they just assumed it was the art. So they went back to what they knew before, which was
Oh, I didn't know this.
non-representational.
Really?
Yeah, the Spannerman Gallery was a real big one in New York. Great gallery, had been open for over 100 years.
Hmm.
And he told two well-known painters that I know that representational painting is dead. And he started going back to selling non-representational painting. And I think he kept the gallery open for a few more years and then it closed ultimately. So I just think there is room for everything. I think what is really refreshing, though, is when somebody tells their own story.
Yeah.
And I had a dream a bunch of years ago, and I was really struggling with trying to figure out, who I am and where I want to go with my work. And it was wonderfully symbolic, and it was on New Year's Eve.
Wait. How many years ago was this?
It was maybe 15 years ago.
Okay. And how long have you been painting?
Oh, geez. I've been painting outdoors since 1986. So long time.
So that I don't want to skim over that. So you felt like you didn't know who you were and you want to figure out who you are just
No, you know what I
15
felt
years
like?
ago.
The analogy that I'll use is I felt like I wasn't wearing the right jacket.
Right.
Like I could put it on, but it just didn't fit right. And I was trying to figure out what the hell was going on because I'd been studying intensely and I was trying to be very truthful to nature and all that. But that's not art all by itself either. Copying, trying to be faithful to the thing in front of you, to a mimetic or a photographic degree, which I was never anyway. But the point was, I have this dream and I walk into a gallery and it's one of these big square box galleries and there's paintings all along the walls and there's framing tables in the middle of the room. And the room's wide open. And I'm looking at the work. I walked in with my wife. She went one way, I went the other. And all of a sudden I look down at the table and there's these large, like 30 by 40 inch unrolled, very important, unstretched, unframed, unrolled canvases sitting on the tabletop.
Mm-hmm.
And they were riveting, absolutely riveting.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've never seen anything quite like this before. So I asked the gallery director, I said, "Excuse me, could you tell me who did these?" And she said, "Sure, it's that young woman, young woman over there in the corner." She's this beautiful young woman in a flannel shirt, untucked with jeans with holes in them and paint all over her jeans. I said, "Excuse me, may I ask you about your paintings?" And she was annoyed. It was like, "What do you want? What do you want?"
What?
And I'm like, "Oh, well, I just would like to ask you about the paintings." "What do you want to know?" she said. I said, "Could you tell me where you painted these?" And she goes, "Over there." And she points out the window, the front of the gallery. And across the street is an empty lot that had gone fallow. you know, the little bushes, scrubby trees and bushes growing up. I walked over to the window and I looked out there and I'm like, oh my God, she did paint that. But she painted a subjective truth. The color in it was subjective, but it was all still subordinate to nature. It was amazing. I'm like, that was the answer, right? It's not just about faithful representation, which is, I think it's always been important, at least in my study, but it's also about making really good subjective choices and connecting spirit to a mark.
So I want to ask you about this.
Integration of those two things.
This is something that I've really put a lot of thought into as I've started to explore landscape painting, because I've heard two different approaches to landscape painting, and yours might be sort of a hybrid, and that's why I want to ask you about it. But one is, it doesn't matter what you're painting, it matters what the picture looks like, right? So I've seen people, so I've seen people go out and they'll be plein air painting and move things so dramatically, and then they'll bring it back into the studio and completely change it again. And it's no longer where they were even standing. It looks completely different. And their attitude is,
okay, no, I know exactly where you're going. Yeah.
Okay, but let me give you the opposite extreme. So their attitude is, it doesn't matter. What matters is making a beautiful picture. Now, just to be clear, I don't have a problem with either perspective. I just want to know what you think, and because I admire your work so much, but also I want to tell you kind of where I'm leaning and get your thoughts. And then the other extreme is like this sort of site size approach, where you go out and you literally copy it, and you'll see these people on Instagram like having their painting almost camouflaged into the background it's painted up.
Yeah, I don't like that. I'm not a fan.
Those are the two extremes.
You know what? All right, so let's talk about this. Yeah. Okay. I have very clear thoughts on.
But actually, let me expound a little further. So my feeling is this.
Sure.
When I go out to a place, I'm experiencing that place, right? And I want to be truthful enough to that place that when a collector buys that, they have something of it, right? It's not just a picture, but on some level, at least, it is a relatively honest portrayal of that place. Mm-hmm. So finding that balance for me is what I'm interested in. What is your perspective on that?
I think actually that's a wonderful observation. I don't differ terribly with you on this. What I will say is this, like I said, mimetic or copying the site size thing, where they try to line the painting up with the thing. I find it, I'm sorry, because I've got friends that do it that I have great respect for, but it's just tricky to me. And look, if you want to paint a trompe-l'oeil painting, do a trompe-l'oeil painting.
Right.
You know, and I'm going to use Innes. I'm going to quote Innes on this, because he had a brilliant quote about it. And he said, "There's a bar in New York with a painting of a barn door with hinges so real, you'd almost believe it was a real door, but the very fact that it's a painting tells you it's a lie. So why bother?
Yeah.
Let a painting be a painting." So, and see, that I agree with. I totally agree with. I also agree with being thoughtful to what's in front of you. I think the tones that exist in nature are so delicate and exquisite and very hard to attain. Neutrals, finding rich neutrals that serve color in a painting is one of my favorite pursuits, right? It's not about color. It's about how you serve it with neutrals, because color is like I say once in a while, somebody will send me a painting to critique. I'll say it's like a room full of redheaded stepchildren all screaming at the same time for attention. So because you're using chroma everywhere. Chroma cancels out chroma. It's like someone who screams all the time. After a certain point, the message is lost, right? So while I appreciate that, I think especially for a student, and actually I believe this fervently, going in and telling students, "Oh, if you don't like that, change it and move it," and everything else, I think it's a huge mistake. And again, I'm probably getting myself into some hot water here, but I'm going to tell you why. Because learning relativity is the key first. Learning to make things relative to each other. Carolus Duran, you probably know this from what I read about Sargent. When he studied with Duran, they had to paint every plane on the head with a separate color and value. We're not allowed to soften an edge until everything was completely in harmony. So it wasn't about softening and it wasn't about edges. It was about the relativity of tonal planes and color planes. And so learning to paint what exists, the relativity that exists in front of you, I think is really hard. And I think it's a really beautiful thing. And a lot of the time I've met people that exaggerate terribly with their work. And I just wonder if they actually took the time to actually see things as they are, if they might not be more satisfied, right? Instead of trying to put your stamp on it all the time. See, to me, that there's the balance of both those worlds that you're talking about. The spirit of the place, look, the spirit of the place and the character of the mark changes the mark for me. Right? So I'll use thick paint, thin paint, semi-opaque, opaque, semi-transparent, whatever it's going to take. If I'm painting old concrete, the only way I can get to that is to pull one color thinly over another with spots of opaque areas to help create that sense of solidity. Then that's what I'm going to do. But that's one of the reasons I've never done a video where somebody says, I've had people say, why don't you just do a video on trees? I go,
that won't work.
Tree?
Yeah.
You know, or clouds or this or that, because everybody's looking for the little hook. And, you know, I don't make people happy generally because I don't tell them what they want to hear. I'm never unkind as a teacher, ever. I don't believe in that. That whole 19th century thing about being mean and belittling people, I hate all that. But honesty is important.
Right.
You know, and if your drawing is subpar and your color and value is advancing beyond that, you're going to be in trouble later on. And that drawing is going to be the anchor that you drag behind you forever. So if you want to work on that drawing to keep those skill sets into alignment so that these more delicate or sensitive or deeply felt things that you want to say, they'll be within reach because you'll have the skill to get to it.
Right.
How do you get to that level of nuance? There's two parts of it, because have you ever seen with children, sometimes they'll draw a self-portrait and even though everything's wrong, it looks just like them. What is that child getting that we're missing? That's number one. And that's the spirit of something. They're unfettered by preconceptions and their reception is different than ours. So they're seeing actually what's important. They're not seeing everything.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important consideration. That's where I think, you know, learning to paint optically, all of a sudden, instead of rendering everything, if you just said, I want to look here, you know, or having a hierarchy of lights in your painting, for example, you know, with glare. I was teaching somebody last year, and I was sitting outside doing my mentoring because it was like a beautiful spring day, and I was in the parking lot and right by my truck, and I was looking at the highlights that were hitting the bumpers on the cars. I was trying to explain the hierarchy of lights. And when I took a picture of it, all the highlights were the same value. But when I stared at the car on the left and I let my peripheral vision tell me what was happening, those lights diminished as they went outside of that focal area.
Now, is that because of how peripheral vision works, or did they actually diminish?
Yeah, it's binocular vision. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
The camera sees everything equally. So if you're combining, so imagine if you can combine sensitivity, feeling, character-oriented marks, and learning to paint optically, that's going to lead you to making subjective choices in a painting.
So explain painting optically.
All right. So basically, I always use the example when I teach a workshop. Say I have a big group of people. Say there's 18 people and they're sitting in a half circle.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll say, okay, here's the example. I want you to stare at any two people that are sitting next to each other. All right. I want you to focus on person number one. Just squint down and focus on person number one. They're sitting right next to each other, so you can make a relative judgment, okay?
Right.
When you're staring at person number one, notice the intensity of color, the value contrast, and the transitional edges. Without staring at person number two, take them in, Make a conscious choice while you're staring at number one to notice what's different in your periphery. And then after about 10 seconds, move your eye to person number two. And then people go, oh, wow.
Wait, and then at that point, do you paint what you remember from your peripheral
No, because
observation?
you can learn to paint what's in your periphery. There's a painting on my website. I don't know if you can find it. It's
Let's
way
go
down
ahead
in
and pull it up.
It's way down in the queue. Actually, it would be a great one. You have to go way down. It's called Brooklyn with Barrel. It's way, way down to the bottom. Huge
Okay.
epiphany on that painting, okay?
Okay.
That's painted 90% from life outdoors. Very panicked 2 days, okay?
That's a huge painting to do outdoors.
Yeah, I know. It was insane. And my friend Andrew Lattimore is a terrific artist, was kind enough to drive us down there. We left at 3 a.m. from Cornwall, New York, to be in Manhattan by 4:30 so we could get a parking spot. And it was just me and about 700 Asian people doing their morning Tai Chi in this one spot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I had no sleep the night before, and I'm looking at all of Brooklyn. And I'm like, oh, and I'm exhausted, I'm swigging my coffee. I'm going, well, how am I going to do this? All right. First, get the design. I got the design down. Okay, I like this. I put that stanchion of the Brooklyn Bridge exactly where I wanted. It's kind of right on the golden mean of the painting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I, made everything relative to that. But if you could blow the painting up, what you would see is the focal area is that stanchion of the bridge and the area directly below it.
Yeah.
And I had this amazing epiphany, and it worked, which was amazing because you can't paint every window in Brooklyn. You'll go crazy and pitch yourself in the river. It's impossible. So I said to myself, okay, the first tall building directly to the right of the bridge. And when I stare at the bridge, how many windows am I perceiving in my peripheral vision?
Okay. So would that be this
that would be
building
the blue
here?
building, the blue building in the back.
That one. Okay.
Yeah. And then the one below it. And then as you move to the right, what you're going to notice is the buildings start to lose windows.
Oh, look at that.
And there's almost
brilliant.
no windows, and it looks completely real because it's how we actually see.
But you did put windows over here. So why did you
But
decide
look,
that?
if you blow that up, you'll see even that the information is subordinate.
Right
to that.
here. Yeah, right here. It
Right?
sort of disappears.
Yeah.
Oh, that was a great lesson. That's going to save me years of experimentation.
That changed my life, Jeff.
Yeah.
The learning to paint that way. And like I said, the beauty of that is now when I'm painting, whether it's a large painting or small painting, I'm making conscious choices all over that thing all the time.
So painting optically is painting in your peripheral.
Or being aware of how
Being aware.
periphery is affected by when you stare at your focal area, whatever that is.
Okay.
And if you have multiple focal areas in the painting, that's when somebody uses the phrase traditionally, and unfortunately pejoratively, when they say something is illustrative, what they mean is that you've given undue attention to everything in the picture.
Right.
You've rendered your way through the image.
And then it becomes like that analogy with the redheaded kids in the,
everything's
everyone's redheaded, then
for
everything's wants attention. Yeah.
So hierarchy is really, really important in a painting, right? How you establish a hierarchy.
All right.
You can have a hierarchy of lights and darks.
Okay. Let me ask you another question that you had talked about this a while back, and I already mentioned it, but this idea of taking ordinary places and being able to find the beauty in ordinary places. You are a master at this, and I find this a good example. I mean, I've told other people this that I've interviewed. I could drive around for hours looking for that babbling brook because I'm guilty of that. Right?
We all are.
Right?
We all do that, especially in the beginning.
Yeah.
And I always say to people, especially younger people that are kind of getting started out there, and they can't wait to be in a gallery, and all of a sudden the gallery says, "Oh, you just did 10 more of those babbling brooks."
Yeah.
So it takes a very strong person to go, yeah, I really can't do that. All you're thinking is, well, first of all, it strokes my ego. Second of all, it puts money in the bank account and,
Right.
can pay bills. And for me, that painting you're looking at right there, I love it. You know how a person's face always tells a story?
Yeah.
right? Every line in their face. When my dad passed, I did a eulogy for my dad, and I talked about his hands because they were scarred and gnarly. His nails were split from using a rock hammer cutting stone, and every crack in those hands was something that he gave up for all of us to give us this life that we
That's
have,
beautiful.
right? And
Hmm.
so I think when I looked at that, I saw those old unpainted, rusted towers, and I thought, my God, that patina tells a story. You know, there's a painting at the Getty Museum by someone. I think the name is Van Sweerts, and it's called Head of an Old Woman, and it's a charwoman, a woman who cleaned houses. And Jeff, that painting can make you cry.
Hmm.
He caught the artist caught this gentle, humble resignation in her face.
Hmm.
And it's this face, it's still beautiful, but probably was once stunningly beautiful. You know, you can tell by her mouth, she's probably lost most of her teeth. Like everything is about the beauty of telling that story. So as a landscape painter, why should we be any different? I want to tell you the story about those towers as best I can visually.
So was it
All
the
the
story?
winters.
Was it the story that drew you in, or was it
No,
was it
no. Sometimes
composition?
it can be any of those things. And I think that's the great mistake is thinking a painting has to come from one inspiration.
Well, can you
Like
tell me
to me,
specifically about this one?
this one basically, I love this. Let me put it this way. There is an unintentional, often beauty in functional design,
Hmm.
in industrial design. Robert Henry, in the book The Art Spirit, talked about how he collected tools because he loved the beauty of the utility of the design. And I think in industrial design, these things are first utilitarian, but there's a certain beauty in that utility that I find intriguing.
Hmm.
The proportions, the scale, the shapes, all of those things. And then you get all this variety. You get round against square, you know, hard against soft edges. You get this, you get everything. The beauty always exists in its proximity to opposites, right?
Yeah.
And when I see something that has this amazing collection of this proximity of opposites, it's always terribly intriguing to me.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, the tank car on the right has got rust on it, this greenish, and it was that weird kind of operating room green, you know,
Hmm.
this, but it wasn't incongruous with the rest of the painting. It was unusual, but not incongruous, right? You got the green with the violet behind it. You've got orange and blue, right? You've got red and green going on in there. So it's a whole cacophony of things. Sometimes it's the spirit of a place that drives me to paint it. Sometimes it's the power of a silhouette that drives me to paint it. Sometimes it's a color harmony I've never seen in my entire life. Sometimes it's a light effect that's so incredible that I'm like, I've got to see if I can get a piece of this. So
Hmm.
whatever motivation gets me there, if my sternum starts vibrating when I'm looking at something, however it got me there, I don't care. I got to go after that thing and see if I can get a piece of it.
Do you find that instinct, I want to use that term instinct, I don't know if that's what you would call it, but the ability to know that something is a potentially good subject comes with time? Is it something that has gotten sharper over time?
Yeah, because it's about, I'll keep going back to sensitivity.
Yeah.
You know, when I saw Evening on the Volga by Isaac Levitan,
Hmm.
what I saw was a level of sensitivity that was so uncommon that subject became almost irrelevant.
Hmm.
Think about that. And it was like The Unfinished Slaves by Michelangelo. Now, granted, the David is perfect, and it is. I would never criticize Michelangelo in any way. But the David was done by a 21-year-old man telling the world he's perfect. He's the best. He even signed the sash, right? And it's the Unfinished Slaves are the work of an old man who had nothing left to prove, simply telling the world what he loved.
So this brings up another thought. So sometimes subject that you might find interesting for a variety of reasons, maybe it's composition or silhouette or some of the other things you mentioned, just has an innate power because of people's relationship to that subject.
Exactly. That's what I
And
mean. There's a spirit to a place, and sometimes
right.
that is overwhelming enough, right?
Right. So what is the job of the artist? So let me give you an example. I'm painting the Crucifixion right now.
Okay.
And I had my Catholic cleaning lady come in uh, yesterday, and she had the same reaction she had 2 weeks before and 2 weeks before that. It's just like she gasps every time she sees it. She never gasped
Wow.
at a painting before, right? I mean, she
Mhm.
you can tell she appreciates what I do, but she clearly has an emotional connection
Connection
with that
to, yes.
subject, right? So, what do you believe your responsibility is as the artist when you have such an impactful subject? Like a lot of people, for example, the one right above it, coincidentally, is something that Yosemite, something that people might have a connection to, be it that they visit there a lot, or it's just beautiful, or they live in that region and they appreciate that space. Whatever the reason, what do you think your job is as the artist at that point when you're dealing with a subject that already has so much impact?
But you know what? I'm going to quote Rilke here,
Yeah.
and I'll ruin the quote, but it's good. It's from that
Okay.
same. There's 2 pages. I'll send it to you. I'll take a picture of the two. There's greatest thing I've ever read on why anyone should create, and it was
Yeah.
from Letters to a Young Poet. He said, avoid at first love poems. They are too facile and commonplace, for it takes a fully matured individual to bring something a good where great traditions come to mind in quantity. Therefore, my dear sir, save yourself from these everyday themes and search out the themes of your everyday life.
Hmm.
And what he was basically saying is if you're going to tackle a love poem or a love song or a crucifixion, you damn well better have something personal and big to bring to it
That's a great
because
answer.
you know,
Thank you for
that's
that.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you feel like these types of subjects demand not less attention because they already have their own innate power, but even more. Like
Or
you're
even more. And I think it's more, there's more responsibility put on the artist, to, if you follow up with that quote, to find something, because I think it's possible to paint a covered bridge and not have it trite if you love covered bridges.
right.
Right. But the problem is when you go to Italy, you get toxed out on cherubs.
Yeah.
Italian paintings are
Right.
just there's just chunky little kids with wings everywhere, man. They're everywhere,
Right.
and that's where and I think even if I look at some of Bouguereau's, even though Bouguereau is a great painter, I'm bored by it. Yeah, it's a form
Right.
that it takes a real unique vision, and certain painters historically have been able to transcend that. Okay, I think of Bastien Lepage. I think of Fontaine Latour.
Mm-hmm.
Fontaine Latour was painting still life with thousands of people painting still life around him. Well, what was it that he could bring to it? I mean, and who has the audacity to believe they can bring something to a rose, for God's sakes?
Mm-hmm.
The only thing you can bring to a rose is love and humility, and you paint it with a caress, what's his name, Henry Abbott Thayer. Oh, his roses are beautiful in his paintings. You feel them. And that's why I said, I mean, I'd like to feel it if I could, if I look at something and not just see it. The other one, the other painting at the Getty is a Crucifixion by Rubens.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's another one that was incredibly moving to me. There's real emotion in it. It's not merely pictorial.
Hmm.
And I, like I said, I think that's all we have. If you're going to take a hidebound subject, something that's been done, like Rilke said, really well by a whole lot of people, the only thing you have to bring to it is your take on it. And if your take is genuine and the desire to say that thing overrides everything else, then maybe the marks you make will resonate with feeling, and maybe that feeling will resonate with other people. And that's finding the universal in the particular. And, that's not easy to do.
So, so what I think you're suggesting is that authenticity is critical, particularly when dealing with heavy subjects with a lot of emotional
I think
baggage.
it goes with everything.
Yeah.
I'm bored by so much art that I see because I've seen it all before, and it really
Right.
is purely pictorial.
Hmm.
and that's not what kept me painting all these years.
Yeah.
And you believe me, if I understand what it's like to have bills and to, support a family on one income and do all that kind of stuff and try to keep pure, and it's not easy to do.
Hmm.
You can go down right now, if you paint cowboys really well, you have a really good opportunity, right? There's certain genres that are big, and some artists move into those genres because that's where the coin is.
Yeah.
And I'm not making a judgment about that. I'm just identifying a fact, but I think, carving your own path is tough because there's so much noise out there, right? And not only do you have your own self-doubts, which I think anybody worth their salt will own up to, but if you don't get any validation from the outside, then what? And very often it takes a long time to paint credibly enough at all to even be noticed. So it's easy to understand why people move towards more convenient modes of expression, i.e., adopting the mannerisms of others. You know,
You know what?
I think.
You know what have told my students for years, which I think is congruent with what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I've told them that stop thinking about trying to be unique. Stop, just paint, because you were born different than anyone else on this planet, and if
Yeah.
you just paint the way it feels intuitive to you, then you will
Mm-hmm.
be unique, right?
Well, you know what? It's somebody once said it's discovering what's already there.
Right.
It's just fear. It's a big part of this. I give it authenticity and creativity talk, and I've been working on a book for years about this. And it's that whole thing about self-doubt, and like I said, it's not helped at all by things like Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
If you start to begin to measure your life based on that, you're going to model your life around that. That's going to take you away from anything that's organic in a way of finding out who you're meant to be while you're in this lifetime. For whatever reason, Jeff, what's really appealing to people, it seems to me, just based on numbers that you look at,
Yeah.
are really highly photographic images,
Right.
painted photographically. You see these people doing these giant canvases and they're using this little tiny brush, or they're painting a giant hamburger with mustard next to it, or a giant wave, you
Right.
know. And Richard Estes did it better back in 1972. There's certain galleries that sell only that kind of stuff, and I understand that it feels contemporary, or looks contemporary, but like I said, it often doesn't feel like anything. If you're constantly rendering something, you're not necessarily suggesting something.
Mm-hmm.
I think clarity and economy with brevity are lovely, right? Say what you got to say and be done with it, and there's a lot of verbosity with the brush. Some people, when you look at the paintings, you'd think they got paid by the brushstroke,
Right.
and but that's very popular. And like I said, I'm not saying it should be or shouldn't be. I'm just saying that just seems to be the prevailing taste.
But what I think you
You
are
know,
saying, and what I was alluding to with my experience, is that you can't define or direct your career based on those things. In other
no,
words,
but a
based
lot
on,
of people do. A lot of
yeah.
people do, and see, here's the mixed message thing. A lot of people do, and they're highly effective at it.
Mm-hmm.
And that becomes, a case study for all these other people who want to be successful, in quotes,
Yeah.
right? And so I don't know. I don't have any answers for anybody. I'm just getting to be old enough now that I just realize I do what I do. I try to keep it as pure as I can, meaning the motivation behind what I do. And I try to I'm going to leave a mark behind that's of my time,
Ah,
that
beautiful.
I paint,
Love it.
my time, not somebody else's.
Well, let's talk about a few more of your paintings here. Are there any in particular that you'd like to talk about? And
Well, if you scroll up, there's more newer paintings up.
okay,
If
let's
you
do
scroll
that.
the other way, um,
So while I'm scrolling, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, I want to talk about this one. It's one of my favorites. But before I do, one of the things I want to talk to you about is your relationship with photography. Because I
Mm.
know that, frankly, you don't need it, right? But I also know that you use it on occasion. So what
Yeah,
is that?
I take a
What is that
reference photo.
relationship, and
Well,
how do you
basically,
implement?
it's a distantly respectful relationship, is what
Okay.
I would say. I don't like working from photography. I just did four small little Italian ones
Yeah.
from reference of where I'm going to be teaching my workshop coming up in September in Padula, Italy.
Mm-hmm.
And I love Italy and I can't wait to go paint it. So basically, what I did was I thought, I don't mind doing this because I paint almost exclusively from life. And basically the photo it really is a departure point,
Okay.
for me. But I don't generally, almost everything you're looking at here was painted from life.
Even these, all these 28 by 40s and bigger,
Yeah, if you
even those,
scroll up, you scroll up, you'll see, yeah, they're all painted from life.
unbelievable. Now that I wasn't aware of. I assumed that
Yeah, that's all
you
from
did
life,
some of
all
it
of
in the
that. That one
studios.
I had reference photo because it was 30 below.
Right.
I tried to block it in outside till my hands went numb and I almost couldn't get in my car.
Wow.
But pretty much everything else is, I'll tell you what's, pretty much done from life, all done from life.
So let's talk
Done
about
from
this
life.
one, a gentle indifference, 24 by 30.
Yeah.
I had a painter, a landscape painter once tell me that he would avoid subjects like this. So for those who aren't watching, this is a grove of trees that's very dense. And he said he would avoid subjects like this because of the complexity and the shapes weren't simple enough and it wouldn't make a good painting. Well,
Yeah,
you've
I had a
proven
real,
that wrong.
well, you know what though? I went out, I was just finishing up a workshop and I had a 24 by 30 in the car. And these woods on Madeline Island where I teach, it was a real spiritual center for the Native Americans. And when you go in those woods, you feel something. It's very powerful. And I remember walking down this path, and you see the bottoms are all cut off by the deer. Why you can see underneath it. They eat
Oh,
up as
right.
high as they can go. So that beautiful strip of violet, thank God, was there because it played off the green in there. But I remember walking down the path on my last day to go give a critique, and I'm like, I've got to paint this. I called my wife. I said, "Hey, honey, what's going on? Do we have anything going on next couple of days? I really want to take a shot at this." So I spent 2 mornings, and they were gray days, and I got the painting to around 85%, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But it did need nuance. It did need push pull and lost and found edges, and I had a reference. But most of the painting was done on site.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened is I learned a big lesson on this because I remember being cocky. I came in and I was all excited about it, and I thought, I'll just finish this afternoon.
The first
And
day.
in my bull in a china shop way, I almost ruined the painting.
Mm.
And I thought, you idiot, slow the hell down. Look at it. Let the painting tell you what it needs, which trees need to come forward, which need to go back, which need to interlock and disappear into others. And how am I going to direct the light in here? And where am I going to bring up information? Where am I going to suppress information? Do you know, I spent 5 days doing 10% of that painting, and that was a big lesson.
Wow.
And that's what brought me to kind of where I am now, where I'll do 80, 90 plus percent of a big painting outside, but that last 10%, I'm not in a hurry.
Okay. And that's
I
when you
let the
often
painting, I let the painting tell me what it needs.
and will you, is that a pretty common practice that you'll take a reference and do the last 10 or 20% or?
Yeah, but I don't rarely look at reference. I
Oh,
have it
really?
if I need it. Yeah. If I need it for a bit of information or something, you
Okay.
know.
So I need to spend more time outside. Like this is amazing to me how large these are. It's really uncommon. I'm sure. Well, correct me if I'm wrong. Is this common in the landscape painting
No,
world
it's becoming more common. It's actually becoming a thing.
to paint big
I was,
paintings
I,
on location?
yeah, a lot of people are starting to do larger work
Oh,
outside.
that's great to hear.
I've been doing it for quite a while.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, when I first started doing it, people didn't believe I did these things outside.
It's very
They'd go,
unusual. At least it used to
you didn't
be.
paint that outside. I'm like, yeah, I did. You know,
So this one's one of my favorite too, because again, it's like I would have driven right past this.
yeah, it's kind of nothing, right?
Right.
There's just a little pocket of a valley, a corner in a valley, but that cast shadow with the shadows were moving the whole time. And I used the shadow as a design element. And I'm like, I want to pull your eye into this space, create an opposing diagonal with the hills and then with the clouds and just, have fun with taking what nature is presenting me and designing with it.
Okay,
So,
so I'm going to display my ignorance in front of the world here again. But so you're driving down the road and you see this, but the shadow's not there, right?
well, the
Um,
shadow, when I set up to paint, the shadows were all over the place. I just
right.
picked a pattern
Yeah,
that I like.
you had to design it. So technically what you were seeing wasn't the design you would ultimately have in the painting. The clouds
No, no,
clearly
heavens, no.
the clouds
Yeah,
clearly weren't the ultimate design of the painting when you drove through. So are
no.
you calculating all this stuff as soon as you see it?
It's
Because,
all happening. It's just happening in real time.
but then
The
how do
thing
you
is,
know to stop when it's not a painting without the changes? Does that make sense? Because you made it a painting by putting the shadow in there, by redesigning the clouds. You made it into a good composition. So
right.
what is it that told you this will be a good painting when it isn't already designed well?
Well, you know what? For years, I worked as a designer, right?
Uh-huh.
Regular designer, graphic designer, and studied typography and this and that. There's such a beauty to scale and proportion and thin and thick and this and that. And I actually put a course together. It's composition and design for painters.
Yeah.
That's starting with the linear aspect of a picture first and dealing with balance, unity, variety, and interest and contrast, and then starting to work with four values, black and white and two grays, and learning to take a single image and try to distill that, take the same painting and paint four different light effects on it with four values
Mm-hmm.
so you learn to organize and group your tones, right? So you're not, kind of to use the crass phrase, kind of pissing in the wind. You're being very targeted about, you know, how the eye is moving through it. If you scroll up, I don't know, there's a small painting from it's up quite a ways. I'll tell
On
you.
the small
Well,
works?
actually, this one here. No, actually, you can go back a little bit. You see the valley scene you just passed? Keep going down, 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 down.
Oh,
Up,
down.
down,
Okay.
down. Where is it? You just passed. Oh, maybe. Keep going. It was a big valley scene. Uh, where is it? Oh, it's gone. Sorry,
I
man.
bet it was up.
Uh,
Maybe it was up. Man, you've got a lot of work here. Unbelievable. That one's
See,
gorgeous.
this is a cool one here. Let's talk about this one. Because I was doing a painting trip with my good friend John Cosby. It's great to have a buddy that you can work with that has the same kind of work ethic. You get up early, have your coffee, and you work your tail off all day and have a nice dinner and sit down and look at the work at the end of the day. And he and I are both enamored with Steinbeck,
Mm-hmm.
and I just read of Mice and Men. So we said, we should do a little road trip. We should do like a week and a half painting trip through the Salinas Valley. And so basically, there's a scene in that book where the protagonist in the book has to end up killing his buddy, and he talks about the water coming along the bank at a particular part in the stream underneath the sycamores. And I guarantee you, this is the spot he was talking about. But when I saw it and it had all this space, this sense of atmosphere, and this beautiful rhythmic movement going through it, that was painted over 2 evenings and then finished a little finish up in the studio when I got home. So, having to freeze the effect, right? Because the shadows are creeping in a short period of time, that valley's in full shadow. So I've learned how to do that. There was a painting I wanted to show you that I did as a demo further up that I did, and I designed the entire thing. The shadows were moving constantly, and I started with an underpainting for the darks only, froze the entire effect, thinking about hierarchy and rhythm and how the eye moves through the piece, through all the shadows, because the shadows are what if I can find unity within the shadow, I can throw the kitchen sink into the light in terms of color. But
Really?
the shadows have got to be unified and organized. And that shadow pattern is the golden thread that ties the entire painting together. But learning how to design with the shadow and light and dark in a way that takes time. And when I studied with Osborne, he had a Thursday evening class And he would say, all right, I think it's time for you to try to do a painting out of your head. And I thought he was crazy. And I realized I could learn to do that. Now, is it as nice as something you're actually looking at? Generally not, but you're dealing with what you know and don't know. So you learn to group shapes, you learn to organize form, you learn to create a hierarchy in the linear aspect so the painting has a chance to be active rather than passive, right? So there's rhythmic connectivity within the forms, that everything flows into everything else, and there's a hierarchy of form, primary, secondary, tertiary shapes, so that you see everything as one first, and then you can delight, in the internal passages wherever you decide to look in the image, hopefully.
Hmm. Oh, that's really great. So you mentioned earlier the drawing. You know what I've
Yeah.
noticed in landscape painting is you always know when the artist is only a landscape painter when
Yes.
when they paint buildings, bikes,
Yeah.
tractors, right?
Hmm.
And
Cars. Yeah.
cars, right? Because then the drawings fall apart.
Yeah.
Um, and clearly you know how to draw because I've noticed that about your barns and your, whatever it is that's inorganic that you draw. They're so convincing, so solid, so structurally sound. Um,
Well, you know how it is, like in a face or in a figure, that tiny shift in an angle. I taught
mm-hmm,
figure drawing here in my studio for 14 years.
mm-hmm,
And I'd have a student that was totally despondent on her 5-minute drawing, whatever, doing gesture, again, trying to get the importance of the start, the foundation. And if the start has rhythmic connectivity and hierarchy and placement and all of that, everything else, will kind of fall into place in the image. And sometimes they'd be all upset, and I would come over and I'd say, may I show you something? They'd say, sure. And I take the charcoal and I would make the tiniest difference in the angle on one side of the figure, and then it would react differently to the other side of the figure, and the whole thing would fall into place. And I'd be like, see, you weren't that far off, but this level of nuance is super important.
mm-hmm.
And so if you looked at that little painting you were just looking at, it's called Looking for Tom Joad, the old house. I saw that and I just thought of Grapes of Wrath. I mean, I could just see,
Mm-hmm.
Tom Joad out there. And it turned out that it just turns out to be the oldest house in the valley. So everything about the sag in that roof was important.
Mm-hmm.
Everything about the moss on those cedar shingles was important.
Hmm.
So that shape ends up becoming really, really important in the painting. It's not just a house, it's that house. It's the oldest house in that valley. So what can I tell you? It's like the lines of my dad's hands, right? And the smashed nails or the lines in someone's face. That's a portrait, and trying
Yeah.
to capture the essence of how that was different even than that barn, that unusual barn, which you could see through on the one side of it.
Hmm.
So, but anyway, if you scroll up, I'll take you through some other
Well,
things
let me point out one
yeah.
thing before we scroll up. You talked about the uniqueness of the barn and how every angle's different and unique to that barn. But one thing I also want to point out was that the way you handled the grass and the weeds and whatnot here, as compared to this one, for example,
Hmm.
um, and this one.
Yeah,
And
it's
it
one of the
goes to
old
what you
missions.
were
Yeah.
saying before, where is that you are not painting the same strokes in every painting. It's like this grass needs to be done this way, and the grass on the
Right.
other painting needs to be done that way. There's not just this formulaic approach, and it's just you never know what you're going to get with your paintings, which is so
Well, the thing is
awesome.
to try not to repeat a shape or an angle if I can help it,
Yeah.
unless it's a real conscious choice. you know I just and I go, how do I get that thing from that time?
All right. So where you said you want me to go up?
Yeah,
Where?
just go up. I'll tell you. I'll just keep scrolling. I'll tell you.
Okay.
Find some things that are germane to what we're talking about here.
Do you want me to hop up a little faster or
All right, let's see, go back a little bit.
back down?
Back down. Sorry, I should say down.
Okay.
All right, so here's one. If you scroll here, come back the other way, go up One, two. See this one, Sabrina Basin?
Yeah.
All right. So again, I'd never painted in the Sierras before. Okay. I was up there with my buddy Cosby as one of those big campers. So we camped up at, I don't know, 10,000 feet or whatever it was. And it was 30 degrees outside, and 90 degrees on the valley floor. And I'm painting a fleeting effect here. This is first light, right? So I've got to nail what's going on. I know the foreground is in shadow. So after a while, after a lot of years of studying that, you look at the local color of that thing. And even once the sun starts to move across the valley, I go, if it's that gray stone that's in there, is it moving towards the green because it's picking up sky or whatever? So that when I go in there, I'm able to remember even as the sun changes. Because what I'm really after is the uniqueness of the light hitting those hills in the back and that variety of shape and the color back there. And again, I thank Osborne because, he taught me how to paint a fleeting light effect, from life.
So is this 2 sittings?
This is 2 sittings. And then, like I said, I do a little sewing up inside.
So what are those 2 sittings like? Are you using a fast drying white or are you going wet into wet?
I use lead white, which is fast drying all by itself.
Okay.
And if I want extra drying, I can whip in, it's called Gel and Dry, made by Sennelier. And it's then it dries super fast. But with the traditional lead white, my paintings are dry by the time I pack them to go home.
But are they dry from day 1 to day 2 though? On the second day, are you working on dry paint?
They start to tack up, and in some cases they do dry. So I've had to learn to paint wet and wet over dry.
And which do you prefer on these multi-day paintings?
Well, wet is always wonderful if you can do it. But,
okay.
You have a window. And like I've been painting on these little Italian paintings the last few days in my studio, and I don't have air conditioning, and it's 90 degrees. In 3 hours, the lead white's starting to harden on my palette.
So if you prefer, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
If you prefer wet into wet, why lead white? Why not titanium white?
Lead white is semi-transparent, and it's so beautiful.
Okay.
The effects that I can get with lead white, the light bounces through it and back out again. The problem with titanium, it's like painting with Crest toothpaste. It's got that chalky opacity to it, which I don't like.
Okay.
So that's the answer. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Okay. All right. Let's just look at a couple more. We're actually over 90 minutes, but this is too good.
All right. See, this is the one I was telling you about. Okay. This was a demo for a class, and it was 90 degrees. I was standing on the side of a busy road. The wind was blowing like hell. And I thought, this is the time to do a demo, an underpainting for all the darks. And what I did was I designed that painting. The clouds were just drifting all over the landscape. And I'm like, okay, what do I want to do here? And I got it, careful, as careful as I could with the easel banging around and people talking behind me. You know how it is when you're trying to demo and people are talking about what they had for dinner the night before. And then I said, okay, I'm going to show you with an underpainting how to freeze an effect of light. And I blocked in all the shadow shapes, and I had all my drawing. I left all the light areas open, and I put color back into the shadow and then put color back into the light. So that's an example of learning to freeze an effect from life. That's the reason I mentioned it.
Yeah, that's amazing. That would intimidate the heck out of me with all the clouds, the sparse kind of broken clouds moving around.
Well, I said to the group, look, this can go one or two ways, but I want to try it for you if I can,
This, I wish I knew where the painting was that's on your Instagram. That is a place that you said you drive by occasionally. But this is similar to it, but it's a little stream kind of under the road, and then there's a train.
Keep scrolling up. There you go.
I love that one too. Okay.
I love that one too. I like that painting. Yeah, just keep going. You'll see it. Let's see. You'll see.
Oh, here it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I noticed about this one on your Instagram was how much I'm not going to say it wasn't just warmed up. You really took liberties with the color, and yet you still captured the place, which I think is exactly what you were explaining earlier to my question about what's more important, picture or place. Like you nailed it on this one. It's like it still feels like that place, but the
Well, you know,
picture.
it's funny. I honestly, I painted the color pretty honestly
Well,
from what I
the
saw.
photo didn't look like
Oh, the
this.
photo's awful. The photo's all blown out and
Yeah. Okay.
glary,
Okay. So
right?
this
Because
is the way it really
this is
looked.
painted from life, yeah. And so what happened is there was this culvert, this old culvert from the 1880s in there, and rarely, you know, was there a train parked up there. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. And there was this skanky standing water in there. It was awful, but the color was awesome. I'm
Hmm.
like, this color of this water you know, in concert with those oranges, and they're just beautiful. So
Hmm.
I'm like, I've got to do this, you know. Almost lost my cookies painting that scrim of falling rock on the right, but
Hmm.
it all
Yeah.
worked out eventually,
Yeah.
you
I was
know.
going to ask you about that because I tried a landscape with a bunch of rock like that, and it was a lot. That's a lot to organize.
Well, you know what it comes down to? You've got to break it down. It's like doing a forest interior. You've got upright shadow, underplane shadow, top
Mm-hmm.
plane in the shadow. And if you vary that too much, you start painting portraits of rocks, you're really in trouble.
Hmm.
You know, you got to realize that they're a collective shape. They're a single shape. That grouping is a single shape.
And then
And there's
this.
actually a volume to that single shape.
Yeah. And then this train car
Hmm.
is unbelievably precise. The drawing
Yeah, well, you
skills
know
to
what? Thank
draw
God
that.
it sat still. I think I spent 4 days working on this.
You can
You
tell
know,
that took a lot of work. I can't imagine it
but
wouldn't.
the good news is, you know, I got my shadows in place right away,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because the picture is, you know, it's more light than it is shadow. And
Yeah.
what, you know, and I actually was able to get all that color in. There was this beautiful luminescence to the limestone that was stacked above that culvert there. This orangey, beautiful orangey note. Um, and the other stuff was very gray. I don't know whether they put a scrim of concrete over it or whatever. But again, I'm always trying to get to the essence of those things. If you scroll up, there's one more,
Oh man,
this
that
one.
one's
And now that's a
cool.
terrible image. I got to get that image changed. The painting itself is in the studio here. It's much more impactful.
Is this in New
But
Jersey? Where is this?
you know, this I did, you know, as soon as COVID hit, that everybody was quarantined, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought of that quote hanging over my door from Rilke.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, okay, what can I see 2 blocks away from my building?
No
And I
kidding.
walk every day. I try to walk 4 or 5 miles a day. And I was bringing a little sketchbook with me. And I saw this. I'm like, there's definitely a painting here. I just haven't found the composition yet. And
Hmm.
then when I found it, and I was so excited by that trestle shadow, the shape of that shadow was so cool. And then rhythmically kind of moving your eye through the painting, and then trying to pick up those giant stones on the right hand side. You know, they're God scale. They're epic. You know,
Hmm.
they probably weigh thousands of pounds each.
Oh,
These
that's true. Because
weird,
that light post really, I
yeah,
didn't recognize the scale until I noticed that light post.
yeah. And so
Wow.
so again, it all comes down to character. And if you blow up that piece, you'll see that I'm painting trees that are just starting to bud out. If I could blow it up for you, which I can't, and I could open up that area above the bridge, you'd see the hint of buildings through the trees. And
Yeah.
it's all very abstract, you know, but it's truthful at the same time. You
Hmm.
know, I'm painting what you perceive, not what you're staring at, like we were talking about earlier.
You know, I love that I can't decide what I like better, your urban, unpredictable subject matter or the classic mountains, valleys, streams.
Hmm.
Like you make it all equally beautiful. It's a gift.
Well, you know, I guess, you know, the way I look at it is it's equally interesting to me,
Yeah.
right? And I care about those things that I'm looking at, you know.
Oh
See,
man.
that was a painting. That's a painting, Jeff. I walked by. I've been painting on Catalina Island for 20 years. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's a painting I walked by. And actually, the photo, unfortunately, the shadows are a little bit more luminous than they should be,
Mm.
in the image, or just a little bit darker. But I was so fascinated by that stacking of shapes,
Yeah.
and color and patina because, Avalon, the town of Avalon is very swank. But on the back side of these buildings, you see the 20s and 30s, right? You see it's like an old facade on a Western building, And I'm like, this is so great. This patina is totally awesome. I mean, you can't make this up. And this cacophony or this, like I said, stacking of shapes and colors was just really unique and really fun to paint. And that's only an 8 by 12 inch painting. And it was so complicated. When I tried to draw it in with the brush, it was too half-assed. And I said, no, wipe it out. I spent the entire first morning taking a piece of charcoal and very carefully composing that.
I was wondering about that. That looks really complex.
It's super complicated. I spent 3 mornings on that little tiny painting.
Well, it's worth it. Before I say goodbye, I do want to ask you one question I ask everybody. If you could give young artists a piece of advice on how to become a working artist, what would that be?
What I would say is just study honestly. It's such an unglamorous, unsexy answer, and it's so true. Go out into the world and taste it and touch it and smell it. Engage all of your experiences in the dome of the experience itself. Every sense that you engage in the experience heightens the potential reception of that experience. Unplug. Don't be walking around with a damn headset on. Connect to something, and it doesn't matter what it is. But go to nature, get outside of yourself first. See the breadth of it, see how big it is, and then see how you fit into that. What your piece of that is, not somebody else's.
That's excellent. All right. Well, Joe, I wish I could talk to you all day, but I know you're probably really busy. And, but it has been a huge honor to get to know you better and to learn from you today. I really appreciate you coming on.
Well, like I say, back at you, man. I've loved looking at your work, and I look forward to seeing more of it. So it's a real pleasure and an honor for me to take the time and visit with you. It's always, like I said, it's fun when you speak to somebody who's an artist and they have an artist's eye. Conversation is, can be a lot richer, so it's about big things and small things,
Thanks for tuning in to the Undraped Artist Podcast. If you enjoyed it, subscribe. And if you could, leave a comment or review. That really helps the channel. Please share the show with your friends. And if you're feeling generous, consider a monthly donation at theundrapedartist.com. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next week.